All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome officially. I would like to start by saying that we have some really incredible people here at Hudson Canyon Community College. And this program on allyship was really a true collaboration of quite a few of those people representing Academic Support Center, North Hudson Campus, the President's Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Office of Human Resources. And our panelists today are from academic and student affairs. So these people, these are people who bring so much of themselves and their passion to this college, and I'm so grateful to them. I particularly want to recognize Amala Ogborn, Natalia Vazquez-Bodkin, and Kyle Woolley as my partners in bringing about practically all of the programming that we have made available for to our HCC community over the last few months. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and their talent and enthusiasm to do more and bring more to our community is really unwavering. So thank you. On that note, today's panel on allyship is part of a summer healing series of programming that you may have seen in the last few weeks. I've asked Amala to provide a few remarks on the program as I officially dub her the brainchild of this. So Amala.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. So good morning, everyone. When we were trying to put this program together, I was started to think about what allyship means and how have I been an ally and to whom have I aligned myself with or thought of myself as an ally to. And I really had to make a mental list of who have I shown up for and how have I shown up for them, right? Because we put these programs together. It's basically almost a way of asking people to hear our cry and to align themselves with us for whatever group it is and to help support us so we can achieve whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. And I really had to make a list and think about it. Luckily, I was able to come up with a list. But what I realized was in all these years that I have aligned myself with different groups, I never dubbed it as allyship. I just didn't label it. Um, and I just say this to say that as we go through the program and you listen to the 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 panelists and listen to their reflections, to maybe think about ways that you have been an ally to different groups and you maybe just didn't realize it. A lot of us work with students, and our students are first generation students. Some of them are immigrant students, some of them are low income students. And when we support them and we help them get to where they want to be, that is a form of allyship. And so I've said it in the other program. I just want to call came in, and I just want to reiterate: only you get to decide what your allyship looks like. Only you get to decide who you align yourself with. I think there's a lot of pressure right now to be an ally, and this is what you should say, and this is what you should do. And I just really want to stress the idea that it's up to you. Nobody can dictate that to you. But I do just ask that you ask yourself those two questions while we go through the program: who have I aligned myself with, and how have I aligned myself with them? Um, Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Amala. So now I'll briefly introduce our panelists. And as we pose some of the questions to them about allyship, I hope that they will share a little bit more about themselves. So today we have Eric Adamson, Veronica Gerasimo, Katie Sweeting, and Natalia Vazquez-Bodkin. So, so first question to the panel, and feel free to take it, otherwise I'll just call on you. How has your upbringing shaped your role as an ally? Who wants to go first?
I can go first if that's fine. Yeah. So I promise I won't tell you my entire life story, even though I'm starting at the beginning. So I was adopted, and I'm also biracial. My biological mother is a Black Jamaican woman. My biological father is white. Clearly, I appear mostly white. So this part of me, I suppose, is not something I really had to confront for most of my life, um, because there was no issue. And in fact, growing up, I knew about my biological parents my whole life. My parents told me. So growing up, the Jamaican part was sort of a joke to people, and it was sort of a joke to me. I think when I would tell people or talk about it, the thing that would come up was like, "Oh, cool runnings! Like, do you bobsled?" And I'm like, I wish, but it just didn't seem like a very serious thing. And it wasn't really until around college, and specifically one experience that I had that felt eye opening was my best friend in college for about 3 years was Black, and we were sort of inseparable. We spent every moment together. We, took as many of the same classes as we could. And at the end of that 3 years, I came out to this person, and he was the first person I'd ever come out to. Nobody in my family knew. I'd never come out to someone before. And even though in that moment he said, that's cool, I don't care, it completely destroyed our friendship. And of course people didn't know why he'd stopped being my friend, but when they would come to me to talk about it or to console me or comfort me, a lot of the things they were saying to me were very racist, right? It was kind of like, oh, well, you don't need friends like this Black guy anyway. And it just clicked something in my mind that was like, even though this person hurt me, I really still cared about this person. And it started to shift my understanding of what people really are perceiving in the world that I hadn't dealt with at that point. So that's sort of how I, at least at that time, if I were to label it, like Kamala said, it would be when I started to do things that are associated with allyship.
Thank you so much for sharing, Eric. Anyone else? Veronica, do you want to go before you get to?
I know alphabetically I'm next, I believe, so I'll go next. So I am mixed race as well. My mother is Puerto Rican, my father is Italian and Irish. I think depending the given day or the person, they see me as white or they see me as Hispanic or whatever the case is. But growing up, my mom is one of five and my dad is a single child. So I grew up with my Puerto Rican family, and if anybody knows Puerto Rican families, I have like 30 cousins. I mean, all just always hung out, and what the great thing too is that we're from Manhattan, and when I was 4 or 5, we moved to the suburbs for better life. My dad was a cop and retired and moved us into the suburbs, but I still was very much involved in my family. And they lived in the city. They lived in public housing. My mom now lives in public housing. We weren't really an affluent family at all, but at some point we did move upstate New York, not that far upstate at all. And we were the family that, had a house with stairs. And I remember my cousins always loving coming to our house and just walking up and down the stairs. And it was something that not until later that I realized, living in an apartment, the luxury of a 2-story home was just a great experience for everybody. So growing up, being mixed, I was always very aware of the privilege that we had living upstate and having a house and being able to have the luxuries that potentially other people may not have, but always being aware that the support and the love comes from your heart and your family. A Puerto Rican family, you have all different kind of shades and all different kind of experiences, and it was always just kind of one human life to me. And I remember being very young and always very talkative and friendly, and I in 8th grade I got voted most friendliest, which is no surprise, and then in 12th grade I got a vote most school spirit, which is also no surprise. But I always hung out with everyone, and we lived in the suburbs. I went to a predominantly white high school, but I was always just connected to everybody, and I think that allyship was always very deep within me. I remember, and this may touch on the next question, one of my first instances, my grandfather is Italian. He moved here as a young kid from Italy and had very racist undertones in his language, and used an Italian word against Black people. And I remember being very young and being like, Grandpa, no, that's not nice. Like, what? Why are you using that word? And, oh, okay, Veronica. And he would still say it. I'm like, Grandpa. And like, eventually he stopped. And maybe it was just around me, but I just always remember, sticking up and being able to use my voice. And I think that continues now, where I continue as much as I can to use my voice and have those uncomfortable conversations. And part of that is my privilege too. I came out later in life as bisexual to my family and to my friends, and there was no problem with that. And other than my brother being like, oh, so are you just going to date everybody now? And I'm like, no, that's not really how it works. But I know that I had a very lucky upbringing in terms of acceptance for me and who I am. And that made a big difference. So I continue to make sure that in all the work that I do and all the relationships that I build, that I keep that same open mindset and continue to have those difficult conversations to this day, with family who may think otherwise. But I think that being mixed, and then also having families that had different kind of socioeconomic backgrounds, just kind of always put me in different situations to be aware of where, what privilege I had with who I had. And then also just that we're all one people. So I think growing up, that was kind of my experience in starting my allyship.
Thank you, Veronica. So if we continue with alphabetical, then Katie, turn.
I feel like my story is almost like a little bit of a history lesson, but I grew up in the white suburbs of LA, the San Fernando Valley. I'm a Valley girl, if anybody knows what that is. And my neighborhood was completely white. Both my parents were college professors. My dad taught psychology at Cal State Northridge, and my mom taught English at Santa Monica College. And they were liberal Democrats, members of the NAACP, members of the Fair Housing Council, which means they wanted our neighborhood to be integrated, and it wasn't. So that's the kind of seeds in the ground that I grew up with. My parents were very intentional. So my mom at one point befriended the young man who bagged her groceries at Vaughn's grocery store, Lewis, young Black man. She befriended him. She talked to him several times. Then she had him over for dinner. She wanted to make sure that her 3 children had positive Black role models. Also, my dad would bring home colleagues from campus. But Lewis, who was raised in the South in Alabama and had like 10 siblings, reminded me a little of David Clark's story. He became a lifelong friend and came to my mom's memorial a few years ago and is still a friend. And when I ended up marrying a Black man, he kind of took credit for it. He's like, oh, it's because I was such a positive role model for you when you were very young. And I said, you do get some of the credit. And setting the stage also, if you remember, in 1967, it finally became legal for whites and Blacks to marry. So 12 years before I met my husband, it was finally legal for whites and Blacks to marry. Before that time, it was illegal. Also, in our neighborhood, in the area where I grew up, was called Sepulveda in the San Fernando Valley. And there was a white part and there was a Mexican part. And Sepulveda changed its name. The one part of Sepulveda where we live changed its name to North Hills to disassociate itself from the Mexican part. But guess what happened 6 months later? The Mexican part changed their name to North Hills also. But just to give you an idea of the kind of influences that I had when I was young, and when I did bring someone home for dinner who was not only Black, but dark-skinned, my parents were not surprised.
Thank you, Katie. All right, Natalia, you ready?
So I guess that's kind of a perfect segue because I'm actually the complete opposite. I guess in order to really understand where I was shaped in terms of allyship, I was really shaped out of rebellion. My mother is Panamanian, and we are Panamanian. We come from Bocas del Toro, and it is one of the locations where it's predominantly Black people. And so my mother was raised with 10 siblings, all of extremely varying shades. My mom is like smack dead in the middle. And so she experienced privilege in a way that her darker siblings did not. And she also experienced racism very immediately when she came to this country at the age of 16. And so I identify as Afro-Latina, racially Black and ethnically Hispanic. And my cousins, I have like Veronica, I have like 30 plus cousins. And so I was raised with them, and of my cousins, I am of lighter skin. Not within my immediate family, actually, I'm the darker one in my immediate family. Air quotes. And so early on, I was very aware my privilege was thrown in my face in a negative way. And it was only later on that I came to realize that privilege is positive. I felt like an outsider in my immediate family. But alternatively, I came to use this privilege within my family, within my immediate family, specifically my mother and my father and my grandmother, when they would constantly tell me to basically not procreate with an individual who would make my children darker, because they were going to experience the hardships that they experienced. And it didn't come from a place of, I wouldn't say racism, but I think it came from a very deep place of hurt. And my mother just genuinely didn't want her granddaughter to experience a lot of the things that she is currently experiencing. And so all of this really shaped my allyship. And I guess I'll wait till our second question to dive a little bit deeper into how it's manifesting today with my daughter.
Thank you so much. These are really powerful histories and stories in the making. And it really is fascinating to, especially as a parent, to see how, I'm raising two kids and I'm kind of wondering, are they going to end up in therapy at some point? Because some things, everything that's going on in the world and everything that all the pressures that we have as parents, I don't know sometimes what to do about that. So, but I try my hardest. So we have a couple of more questions for the panelists, and then we will certainly open questions to others as part of the general Q&A. So the next question, and some of you have shared it to some extent, so feel free to either elaborate or not answer it. But can you share the first instance of allyship that you remember or had a significant impact on you or someone else? And maybe this time, Veronica, do you want to start maybe?
Sure. So I remember I talked about the instance with my grandfather. That's definitely one of the early things that I remember. And speaking to what Katie was mentioning too, I think a lot about my dating history. So my grandfather on my father's side is Italian and my grandmother is Irish. And kind of if you go a little bit far back, I don't know the entire history, but if we go far back into kind of the Manhattan Italian Irish history, there was a lot of, kind of clashing, immigrants coming at the same time and maybe kind of fighting for the same jobs and the same, neighborhoods and things like that. And then I look at my father. So I see that as almost like a relationship that probably at the time was not highly looked upon, but love supersedes all. And they kept going with that. And then I think about my father and my mother, and, you have white and Puerto Rican, and there's also a very big age difference between them, which like at the time they started dating is questionable for my dad, but it is what it is. They're still married. And then so you have white and Puerto Rican, and at that time, I know that when my dad brought my mom home, my Irish grandmother was like, I don't want this person in my family. And then she got pregnant, gave her a grandson, and then she was the best. My mom was like the best person in the world. So, and then as I started to date, I started to date Black men, and I would bring them home, and my father was like, nope, this, how do they treat you? Are they gonna, like just all those very stereotypical things. I remember standing up and being like, wait a minute, like we have a history of, mixed race or just kind of like clashing love. Why, why are you having those feelings? And I go, there's a lot with my grandfather that then kind of those thoughts that led to my father that we're constantly having conversations, and especially, more recently with Black Lives Matter. And my father was a cop and, in the city, and has very underlining kind of racial stereotypes that he maybe, being a cop kind of, he saw or made him see, that he kind of continues to bring on. But I think I can't necessarily remember, a specific first instance. I think with my grandfather, that probably was it, but it's just a continual conversation, a continual pushing back, always speaking up that never stops, especially within my family. And I think that probably that experience has given me the courage to have those conversations. Otherwise, I think if you can't have those conversations with your family, then it's even harder to have them with your friends, and even harder to have them with a group of people that you don't know. So I definitely, am happy that I was able to have those experiences and build up that courage and build up that vernacular to be able to continue that allyship throughout.
Thank you. Katie, do you want to talk about a particular instance?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different slant. To me, allyship is standing alongside somebody. So when Dr. Jones referenced the look, I'm standing next to my husband. We both get the look, right? And something that still irritates me to this day is when we go into a restaurant or a store, over 50% of the time, they assume we're not together. So they ask one person or the other, and we're standing right next to each other, but they assume we're not together. But if I'm looking at allyship is standing alongside, I'm not in front, I'm not behind, I'm just standing next to you. I think my experience when I first moved to New York from California in 1980. In 1981, I lived in a Black neighborhood, a completely Black neighborhood. I was the only white, Laurelton, Queens, which at the time in the early 80s, Queens was the only Black county in the country where the median income of Blacks was higher than the median income of whites. A little history there. And so it was a middle-class Black neighborhood, and I was the only white. And my husband was a minister in a large Black church, 3,000 members. The pastor went on to be a congressman, Floyd Flake, and I was the only white member of the church. So standing alongside for me meant being uncomfortable, being called names, being asked, why are you living here? And understanding what it feels like a little tiny bit to be a minority. So for 3 years, and my husband basically said, I'm called to the Black church. So if you can't make your way here, form your own relationships, and have your own ministry, I don't think this thing is going to work out. So I did. We went to Rikers Island once a month. I made a lot of good, close friends. I did my own thing completely separate from anything he was involved in. So being an ally meant the concerns of the Black community are my concerns. I live in the Black community. I'm part of this big Black church. And that was, for me, what it meant to be an ally. I'm standing next to you. I'm with you. I live next to you. So that was an extended learning opportunity of what it meant to be an ally to me.
Thank you so much. There is definitely a bit more of history there. Let's see, Natalia, do you want to share a particular instance or impact or elaborate on what you, your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys see me? Yeah, okay. So the instance of allyship that significantly had an impact on myself and my daughter, and I hope other children, was actually really recent during COVID when my daughter was receiving a virtual spelling lesson, and the teacher made an association to the spelling word brown, and the association was made to dirt. And so, you know, I had this conversation with Amala, and I didn't, I honestly didn't know what to do. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know. I was kind of scared to speak up, but I knew that I was so hurt by this. And my daughter Layla, she's 6. She wasn't hurt by it. She thought I was exaggerating or you know, demonizing the teacher. And I tried to explain it to her, and no matter how many times I tried to explain it to her, she couldn't understand where I was coming from. Later on, she went to prove me correct because she internalized a lot of it. But a lot of our children just aren't aware of some of the lessons that they're receiving, and it's unconsciously, you know, being received to manifest later on in life. And that's one of my deepest fears for my daughter. And so I want to read this letter that I sent initially to her teacher, and it has gone a little further, but I think the letter is more impactful than me being able, you know, telling you the story of what occurred. So good evening, Miss Avillo. Today I listened in on Layla's reading lesson as the class was reviewing the spelling word. The word brown was associated with dirt. While I know that this was in no way a malicious association, it did nonetheless beg me to consider all the other possible associations that could have had a more positive connotation, like chocolate, perhaps. I stress this because the brown skin color has historically been associated with being dirty, which can be internalized unconsciously by young Black and brown girls and boys. I'm bringing this to your attention to make you aware of the implications this could have not just on Layla, but also on other children who will hear this association and will perceive brown people as dirt or dirty. Layla is the only Black girl in County Road Elementary School, which is indicative of the existing redlining within a Northern Valley. As a parent, I am constantly forced to consider providing my child with access to quality education or providing my child with a more diverse school so that she doesn't pay in terms of herself, of her sense of self and identity. My heart aches at the thought of what my child may have to endure in this environment. Earlier this year, during Black History Month, my daughter came home crying because she was excluded on the playground by a group of girls. Layla felt that the girls didn't want to play with her because she is brown. Even when there are no major racist incidents, she faces an assault on daily challenges. Not having teachers who look like her, the isolation of being an only, which often comes with social exclusion, the burden of being the representative minority who has to represent all Black people all the time. In this environment, Layla can never just go to school with the freedom to just learn. She is forced to carry much more every day along with her backpack. Our family truly appreciates your hard work and dedication during these challenging times, and we are open to having a conversation if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you. So I sent this this letter to her, and the response, I didn't have an anticipated or expected response. I think it was more so to educate her, but the response was not as received as I had hoped, and so I took it a step further and sent it to the principal, and we're going to take it a few steps further than that, because I think it speaks to a greater issue. As I discussed, my daughter is the only Black child in school. In an entire school, she's the only Black child. And I think that that speaks to a greater issue. So this was just the most impactful, because as I've said before on other workshops, that since I've become a mother, I live my life through my daughter's eyes and through her experiences. And you know, as parents, I think we all can empathize that when our child cries, we cry as well. So this was definitely a moment of clarity, complete clarity, and that's why this is one of many reasons why, but specifically for my daughter, for her to understand that I'm her greatest ally. I'm going to be there for her, and it really starts with these programs, you know, and these conversations. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being such a strong parent advocate. I know it's tough sometimes, but it's really important. You're doing good. You're doing good, and thank you for sharing that beautiful letter, despite the context of it. Eric, do you want to share or elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. Excuse me. So my first instance, I call it the first instance, even though I don't know at the time. I knew I was doing something allyship. So where I grew up in Idaho, well, all of Idaho mostly, but specifically where I grew up is pretty much 100% white. Very, very few minorities. And I lived in an Air Force town. So there was some diversity that came in through the Air Force and people being stationed there, but it wasn't like permanent, right? Because, you know, they're going to be there a year or two and then they're going to get stationed somewhere else. But when 9/11 happened, I was in middle school, and one of my close friends was a boy named Reza, who was had brown skin. He was Muslim, the only Muslim family in our town. And as far as I know, they're still the only Muslim family this much later. And when 9/11 happened, the degree of bullying against him just escalated so far. I think he'd always been bullied, and in my head up to that point, he was kind of like a I don't know how to say it, like a trickster. He liked to pull pranks on people. So I'd always thought that the retaliations against him were because he was doing things like that. But after 9/11, people very explicitly, teachers included, would do awful things. So he would get beat up fairly regularly, just like really brutally. And every time it happened, the person who assaulted him would be forgiven and he would be suspended for being in a fight. So me and another kid named Adam, we decided that it was our duty, our something we could do to protect him. So we would stand by him at his locker to make sure people didn't run up and start attacking him. We would walk home from school with him. And these are things we did sometimes anyway, but it became this like, we have to do this because these other people are gonna hurt you. And looking back now as an adult and thinking about that situation, I remember having these conversations with my parents, specifically my dad, that were like, these people are attacking my friend Reza because of 9/11. Like, he was not involved in that. Why are they attacking him? And my parents, like I said, my dad really trying to explain to me that these people's anger was justified because of what had happened in 9/11. And looking back and understanding, like, thank goodness I didn't get that as like a reasonable excuse, but that this is how teachers were justifying people beating him up and treating him poorly, and teachers too. I mean, I remember, we were friends, so we took as many classes together as possible, and he was constantly being sent to the principal's office for very minor things, like, like he would, I don't know, forget a pencil, and it's like, go to the principal's office, you're gonna get suspended. And I'm like, just I think that stepping up there, like I said, it didn't feel like allyship. I don't know if he hadn't been my friend, if I would have put the same effort in. But looking back, I think I knew what was happening was wrong. I just wasn't able to process exactly why yet. So that for me is probably the first.
Thank you, Eric. I do find that in my experience, it has started with being friends and being able to know more about the person. And then the combination of everything else, standing alongside them or perhaps speaking up on their behalf when they're not there, to the extent that, it's appropriate. So I think that's important. So I'll shift gears a little bit. Instead of opening up the third question to the panel, I did want to bring the context of the question, but I wanted to have our attendees and participants ask or comment on or ask our panelists, but think about or the context of now and what are some tangible, actionable things that an ally can do, especially during a pandemic, that can contribute to social justice. So I'm going to leave that out there as the context, perhaps, and I will ask our participants if they want to ask a question or share any comments. No brave souls? So we'll just go to the panelists to talk about the question. So what are something that you think, what are some of the actions that can be done in the context of where we are during a pandemic, during this rise of social justice and voices being raised?
Can I jump in, Anna? It's Chris.
Oh, sure.
I kept going back and forth. Do I want to do this or not? But I won't. I'm not sure if this really aligns with the conversation, but I'm going to share it. So, not unlike what I heard Eric describe as where he grew up in Idaho, I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania. New Jerseyans may think sometimes of Pennsylvania as fairly progressive. It usually was a blue state until recently. But actually, it's often called Pennsyltucky. You've got Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and they're progressive, and everything else is Kentucky or Alabama. Okay, so I grew up in that part of Pennsylvania, and it was actually I was privileged in so many ways. Okay, I went to a high school, maybe like Eric. I think there was one African American out of 1,000 or so people. Very waspy. My brother, who's 6 years older, was sort of the quintessential white male student. Co-captain of the football team, co-captain of the baseball team, president of the band, first in his class. I could go on. Hard footsteps to follow on. One of the real holes in my life right now is that period of my life, because I didn't have the courage in that environment or society to be true to who I am, and more or less, and beyond that, to share it with my family and others. I was gay in a community that absolutely persecuted anyone that was gay. And even my family, who were incredibly loving, were clearly homophobic. I grew up with that. And I was bullied frequently. When I think about my particularly middle school and high school experience, part of it was really great. I mean, I got really involved in politics, and part of it was horrible because I got beat up and I was bullied. And so I left that area when I went to college and really never went back. But I've always felt incomplete and hurt in some ways by it. So I did something really weird just 3 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. I don't know if any of you ever look at Classmates. Are you familiar with classmates.com by chance? I hadn't looked at it in years, but I keep getting these emails. And so I went in, and I think years ago I had posted a profile on there. I hadn't looked at it in 20 years. And I just went in and updated my profile on Classmates. And I told my story. And I told them where I am now and a little bit about, things I'm proud of. And then I told them that I forgave all of those who had treated me badly and who had bullied me over the years. And then finally shared that, one of the things that I'm now, you may not be able to identify with this if you're in the LGBT community here, because it's almost like the majority. It almost feels to me like the majority. It almost feels like there's no big issue here, but still back there and in rural areas like that, this is still really a difficult thing for so many people to share their truth, to come out, to be authentic. And we know that suicide rate is much greater among this population. So I ended this profile statement with, I don't choose to try to bring visibility to my sexual orientation, but I also don't hide from it. And I feel a responsibility to be an ally to others who are still struggling with sharing their truth and coming to terms with being comfortable in their own skin. And I got to tell you, I just in the last 3 days, I've gotten this avalanche of wonderful positive feedback from some people that really hated me. And the feeling was kind of mutual. But there's something, I can't tell, there's something incredibly cathartic about this experience from 3 days ago for me. I don't know if it fits into ally or not, but just chose to share it with you.
Thank you, Dr. Reaper. I think it is really important in terms of seeing seeing the examples or the role models, and especially for our students. We're getting some noise. If you all can mute yourself. So I think that's really important, especially for our students, to be able to relate to people that they see around them and the stories around those people, and the stories that they come from and they tell, and the histories, the rich histories. And I am thankful that we are able to offer, and we're doing all these programming, and we're starting to do more about talking about different stories, and really identifying almost unintentionally identifying role models for students, and identifying people as role models for those who may not even be aware that they can be role models. And so you are certainly one of them, Dr. Reaver. I'm not just saying it because you're my boss.
I want to just jump in and add on just a little quick stat that I saw recently. A friend of mine works for the Trevor Project as a research developer or something in that realm. And they put out some findings recently, and a big billboard that went up in California. Acceptance from at least one adult can decrease the risk of LGBTQ youth attempting suicide by 40%. So just acceptance from one adult can decrease it by 40%. And we think about allyship and the impact of allyship. I thought that was it's almost scary, but something to kind of keep in mind. And we are working on getting a safe space training, which will have a flyer. We're working with communications to get that out, a collaborative effort. So continuing, because allyship, especially we talked about as we were working on this program. Right now, we're focusing, kind of the main focus is on Black Lives Matter, but we know that allyship expands out to so many areas.
I wanted to say in that sense too, and I guess this also applies to the context of what you can do. So this wasn't during the pandemic, but a few semesters ago, I think it might have been 3 semesters ago, I was teaching LEAP, and I had the name of the high school is gonna slip my mind, but it's entirely Muslim students. Maybe someone knows the name. I can't remember the name right now. Sorry. And so I had these students for English 101 and then 102 the next semester. And in 102, there's one student in particular who for one of their essays, they have to pick a word and just study the etymology of that word. Yes, Miftaful Ulum. And for his word, he picked gay. And he was very interested in this word and what it meant and the history of the LGBT community, but specifically gay people. And it's certainly not the craziest word people have picked for this assignment, so I didn't think much of it. And then for his following essay, he wrote another essay about the experiences of gay people. And in my head, I thought maybe this student is exploring his sexuality and just isn't in a position or part of a community that is accepting of this. And at the end of the semester, he came up to me, and everybody had left, and he was the last one in the classroom, and he said, "Professor, can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Okay, sure." And I kind of suspected he was going to ask, and he said, "Are you gay?" And I said, "Yes." And he got very shaky, and he shook my hand, and he said, "I really want to thank you for a great semester." And I think about that moment because, sort of like Dr. Reber said, I don't, when I'm at work, I'm not even really thinking about my sexuality. It's like, it doesn't feel like it's a relevant part of my life in that moment. And it's the first time a student had ever asked me. But I thought back to all of the conversations we'd had about his essay where I had made some effort in his writing to, he would say something negative or kind of a stereotype about gay people in his paper. We would have a conversation. Why are you putting this in here? Let's talk about, it's not really academic to say this. Why don't you do some research and figure out these statistics? And I think back a lot to ever since then, hoping that in that moment, in whatever happened in our class, and allowing him to write about it and talk about it, that if it is something he's dealing with or experiencing, that it was helpful in some way, right? Especially if he's in a place where he can't or feels unsafe, right? Expressing that.
Also, along with that, being an English professor, and not necessarily English even, but I think the kinds of texts that we choose to teach, and are we teaching texts from diverse authors? And Natalia, to what you were talking about, we talk about symbolism. And when I teach The Lottery, if anybody's familiar with that short story, there's a black box. Okay, why is the box black? Does it have to be black? And we talk about the symbolism of colors and how colors in and of themselves have no meaning, but different societies have put meaning onto colors. In China, red is luck, So the color black in and of itself does not have a meaning, but we have given it a meaning, and a lot of times that's a negative meaning. So these are the kind of discussions that we have in English and literature classes that is also, I guess, a kind of a round the way form of allyship, right?
I think a lot I had mentioned in our kind of as we started to talk about this panel that I feel like a very insecure ally at times, or very guilt-filled. I'm a very at times naive, positive, optimistic. I don't you say the meaning of the color black, and I'm like, oh, elegance, because I think and then I don't I struggle sometimes because I sometimes have to check myself a little bit, like, Veronica, stop being so naive with things. I remember my first boyfriend, would always get the look and would always be like, why is that person looking at me? You know, and I'm like, no, everything's good. Come on, let's go. They're just, you know, and not even realizing because I didn't live that experience and thinking that everybody thought positively and loved and accepted. And, you know, obviously I know that people are racist and have stereotypes, but, you know, it would be a conversation almost every day that we had, that I tried to almost like, you know, pull him back and bring him up to not feel that, even though I know in reality it was his reality, and it was something that he was living with. But there's always that conversation of, you know, am I doing it right? Am I doing enough? Am I aware enough? I mean, I know you think about tangible, think about your role. Like Katie was saying, you know, what in your positioning in your role can you do to continue to be an ally? And I know within our area, obviously we do a lot of programming, a lot of, you know, commemorative month programming, and we definitely at times have not gotten it right. And even talking about stuff like Pride Month, you know, okay, let's make sure that we're not just doing drag queens, and that, you know, or talking about Black History Month, and that it's not just about Black culture. Like, let's get the Black history in there. That's what it's for. And, you know, definitely times that I've been checked about what approach or what programming, and being like, okay, that's not the intention, but we know that impact is more important than intention. And really being able to say, I know the intention wasn't there, but being mindful of what the impact is. So, you know, I think in terms of tangible, always checking yourself and really encouraging people to check you as well. And I try to tell those around me, like, if there's something that I said that is wrong, and in my naive brain, maybe not getting it right, like, tell me. I'd rather be told than think that, okay, nobody said anything, so therefore it's okay. And then I also hope the same for those around me, that I can speak up and tell them, you know, hey, you said something that wasn't right. So let's take that as like a learning experience. And I know that your intention wasn't to be mean or disrespectful, but your impact was that. So how can we learn from that and continue to move on? And definitely within the tangible things we can walk away with is really utilizing your strengths. You know, we talked about, I think Amala had mentioned it, you know, not everybody is okay going to a protest, or not everybody is okay speaking out against their family or having those difficult conversations, you know, but what are you really good at? What can you do? And then I think with that too, because going, you know, with the Black Lives Matter protests, when I went to the first one with Amala, I remember being scared. I mean, COVID-19 and like thousands of people. So you're like, there's a lot of people there. Oh my gosh. But I also remember, you know, when we first went remote and talking to my family and letting them know, you know, they were very, of course, everybody very scared. And they're like, okay, you're not going to go into work, right? I'm like, well, no, but, you know, there are students that are graduating, and we want to put together these celebration packages for them. And I'm going to be going in some days for that. And they like didn't talk to me for a couple of days because they were so mad that I would put myself at risk. And I was like, but that's really important to me. Like those students didn't get that experience, and it's really important to me. And then to have the second thought of, well, I don't want to go to the protest because of COVID-19. And I'm like, but it's important to me. If I was going to go to school, granted, you know, being around 5 or 10 people versus being around thousands is very different. But if it was important to me to do this, and if it's important to me, you know, like really checking yourself as well. But always, you know, I'm very talkative. I speak up, I speak out. So, you know, I'm good at that. I will be the one to say, hey, this person's not being treated right, or how can I help this person, or how can I speak out for this person? I see that, you know, they could be brought to another level, or they're not getting the recognition or respect that they should be getting for their work, or, you know, hey, you know, we're a team. We're all going up together. So, you know, looking at where your strengths are and going with that, but then also going outside of your comfort zone. I talked like really, you know, this is like super minimal, but I'm not a movie person. I fall asleep within the first 10 minutes. Like, it's just, a movie to me means nap time, but that's how we learn. So I will try to push myself out of my comfort zone to watch movies that teach me something that I don't know about. So, you know, this past weekend, of course, unfortunately, the death of John Lewis, and I was like, we have to watch, you know, Selma. I've never seen it before. I don't, you know, I know the story kind of. So we sat and watched it, and, you know, had to take a couple breaks to kind of shake my sleep out. But, you know, even something I think as small as that, to learn and putting yourself outside your comfort zone is really a valuable thing as an ally, to continue to learn and to not stop.
And I think just quickly that along with what you're saying, Veronica, about the idea of sort of showing up, that when we're thinking specifically about the pandemic, I think it's easier than ever to show up, right? That when events are being held in person, which it has its own power, it's like it can be difficult just to travel there, to get between two events, to have the time to commute there. But now that I think in the pandemic, I'm like, all you have to do is sign in. In fact, you could do back-to-back meetings because you don't, events. You don't have to go anywhere. You're just at your computer. And I think taking that first step of like showing up somewhere where you can learn and will be questioned, which is hard. It's hard for someone to look at you and say, you've been doing these things wrong, and then to accept those things and say, okay, I've done them wrong. How can I change? But like opening yourself up to that first step, and maybe there's something even comforting about the pandemic setting, that you're behind your computer screen, so you can get like a slightly easier version of that initial difficult question, because you're like, okay, I'm safe in my bedroom. No one else is here. I'm just listening through the computer. And yeah, I think, and I just wanted to add too, Amala has talked about this, Amala, Natalia, I can't remember who else was there in some of these previous meetings, but about like that everybody's form of allyship and contributing to social justice looks so different. Like if you make art and that art is expressing what you believe, if you go to the protest, if you write, if you are good at things like the political side and you want to write letters and call your congressman and all those things, like whatever you contribute is greater than zero, right? So it's still a contribution.
Eric, if I can piggyback off that. So we have had a lot of these conversations behind the scenes. So a lot of it I just kind of want to reiterate, but you said something very important, and it's listen. You're at home. It's very easy just to log on. Beyond, you don't have to participate, but there's something to be said about listening, and not listening for the purpose of responding. Listening for the purpose of digesting it and truly understanding what this marginalized group of individuals are saying, and acknowledging your own privilege, and understanding it's not about you. It's not about how you feel. It's not about your opinion. It's about theirs. It's about the other person. And there's a quote that I found on Instagram that I want to read to you guys because I found it very profound. When you debate a person about something that affects them more than it affects you, remember that it'll take a much greater emotional toll on them than on you. For you, it may feel like an academic exercise. For them, it feels like feeling their pain only to have it diminished, to have their experience diminished, and sometimes their humanity. The fact that you might remain calmer under these circumstances is a consequence of your privilege, not increased objectivity on your part. So a lot of us, I think that especially in academia, we need to practice our listening skills. And I myself, I need to practice my own listening skills, specifically as a mother. And a lot of us were probably born in a generation where it was like, you're seen and not heard, hush it. And I'm trying to rewrite that script with my own daughter and let her know that no, your voice is very important, and I want to hear it, and I want to experience life through your eyes. And then beyond that, there's something to be said that when you hear something, you also don't allow it to just go out the other ear, as my mother would say. Learn from your mistakes, and acknowledge. And Amala has taught me this. I knew this before, but I think Amala, you just really reinforced it. You're very forgiving, in encouraging me to forgive myself And when someone calls you out, don't become defensive. Learn, and change the behavior moving forward. And sometimes a very simple "I'm sorry" goes a very long way.
Thank you, Natalia. So we have listening, we have showing up, we have learning, we have standing alongside, we have sharing our stories and relating. So lots we can do as allies to in whatever way that we feel is important to be an ally.
Hi, Anna. This is
Jones,
Derek.
yes.
Let me
Go
just
ahead.
add to the list is, as I'm listening to the panelists, as I'm reviewing all of the participants that are on this particular event, I'm reminded in a good way that we and others can be allies at whatever level we are. And oftentimes we view allies as the most senior folks in the workplace, the most powerful people in the workplace, but that's not necessarily true. And how can we constantly change that mindset that anyone can be an ally? And always lead with the words. To add words to your list is that self-awareness has to be on that list. There's got to be a keen sense of empathy. What does it really mean to empathize with marginalized people? And I challenge everyone that's on this particular call is try to live a life with the mindset of earned learning and learning on a constantly basis. We all have baggage. We all have those scripts. We all have the tapes that are not very positive in our lives. How can we unlearn some of those scripts and those tapes? And I think that our workplace will become a better place when we can try to faithfully and honestly trust and accept and be accountable for all that we do. So my 2 cents to add to your very good list of things that you've added today.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I'm mindful of the time, and so we can, for those of you who need to go, please feel free. If you want to stay, we'll definitely stick around. I want to offer this quote as well in terms of how I see social justice generally, but definitely, in terms of allyship more specifically. And that's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And that has, in terms of knowing what matters, in terms of having that inside kind of inkling that something is wrong, and so I and there's something wrong with the situation and I want to try to do something about it. That's definitely been one of the things that I'm trying to teach my children, to be able to be an advocate. But before that, they need to realize that there's something wrong, that there's something that they need to step into. So I wanted to offer that as we are closing, but I definitely want to offer the opportunity for any other questions or comments. We have over 30 people here. So please feel free before we just, thank our panelists. Sarah?
Yeah, bear with me. I'm still trying to formulate this a little bit. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to formulate this into a coherent question. I want to ask the panelists if you could comment on, I guess, the inclination to get, where do you put your attention, I'll say. How about that? Where do you put your attention, and where do you put your attention, and how do you make sure that you're not, in your efforts to be an ally to one group, unintentionally ignoring a different group? I would like to point, for example, I don't think that this is, I don't know how widespread this is. I want to point to the news recently, last week, 2 weeks ago. There were several non-unknown personalities, not quite celebrities, but known names that were part of one group speaking out against another group. How can you be ally to everyone? Is that important to be an ally to everyone? And at what point is being an ally to one group not enough?
Amala?
Hi, Sarah. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in
Hi,
a
Mom.
long time. I think only you can decide who you align yourself with, and I think part of being a good human is to, even if the people you align yourself with, when they are wrong, when they say things and they speak out and say and do things wrong that is against another group, you have to speak out. That is your responsibility. And I'll give the example of like some people who support the Black Lives Matter movement versus the police. It should not be, for me, it shouldn't be one or the other. And so in my daily life, where I have people who bash the police or speak down about the police, we've all had negative experiences with them. I've had my own negative experiences with them. But when we paint people with a broad brush and say all police are this, we are doing the same thing that we are fighting to have stop. And so it perpetuates a cycle. So I don't think you can be everything to all people all the time. I don't think you can necessarily be an ally to everyone, but you have to speak up when people are wrong. And just because this is your in group doesn't give them the right to oppress an out group. It's still not right. It's still not okay. And you speak up in either situation and on either side. I don't think it should be, allyship shouldn't, for me, it shouldn't be a us or them. It should be, how can we correct this and how can we do this together? And if you're in it and you're with me, that's cool. But if you're not, let me work with the people that are going to help me do this. But we have to do it together, no matter what it is.
And I would just add, I think it depends on the community you're in, the relationships you have, the family you're in. So while I feel like I'm part of the Black community, I'm also part of the deaf community. I have several deaf family members. So I do things like post on Twitter. Masks are a problem for deaf people who are trying to read lips, you know? So where you find yourself, it's not like I should be or I have to be doing this. Where you find yourself, what you're drawn to, the community you live in, the family you have, that's who you become allies to, I think.
And I thought, oh, go ahead, Natalia. You go. Okay. As you were saying that, Sarah, I was wondering if you were referring to, there were some NFL players who were posting quotes by Hitler about Jewish people. Yeah. And then a bunch of people from the Black Lives Matter movement were saying, yeah, the Jewish people are the reason that Black people are in the position they're in. It was a very strange moment. And I think it was very wrong, of course, for that to happen. And I think what it illustrates is that social justice in general is extremely complex, right? That it's not like there's just people who are parts of a single group and then they go against each other. And that part of being an ally or advocating for social justice is trying to wrap your head around the complexity that is social justice, right? That I remember in early Black Lives Matter protests, there were some people who had problems, including LGBT, specifically transgender people who had been brutalized, right? That this is a complicated issue. And part of the social justice is to not use that broad stroke to say there's people in this community who believe this and therefore it invalidates their struggle, right? But recognizing that everybody in every group has a lot to learn. I mean, if the world is so complicated I shouldn't say complicated, so the world is so diverse, right? That you can't, maybe it's impossible for us to know it all, right? But that you can at least open your mind to be able to receiving that all. And like Amala said, when that stuff happens in those communities, saying, okay, this part of the community is frustrating, and I can be frustrated by the fact that an NFL player posted a Hitler quote, but not see that that is detracting from my support for justice for the Black community, right? If that makes sense.
Anna, I wanted to add something, if I may. I would like to just very briefly go back to the words of my wise professor. Some of you might know him, Dr. Nabil Marchhood. We have a lot of conversations about topics related to this that we're talking about today. And one of the things that he mentioned is like, we are, at the end of the day, tribal people. You know, our world is as big as our surroundings and the people that we know and the people that we interact with. And some of you mentioned that. When he becomes being an ally, and to some of the points that you made, you know, and that's kind of like the big barrier. And, you know, I'm an ally to this group, not this other group, and then it's happening. And what happens when there's like infighting between the groups? Where do I ally with this? And I think that we have to look from the perception of that. You know, we are an individual within a tribal community, and our goal, I think, should always be to expand that circle. And every time that you become an ally to a group and to another group, we'll just expand that, right? And I just wanted to go back a little bit to what Katie said, what Adam said, what Eric Adamson said, and what Chris Rivers said about, you know, some areas in the country that are very homogeneous. They're very different there, and some of the stories that you told that were happening, you know, years ago might still be happening today. And to that, I just would like to share a quote. This is what's written over 200 years ago by Edmund Burke. He wrote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And I'm thinking that if we're thinking about allyship, if you and Eric, I'm sorry to go back to your example, but you had a friend that was in an odd situation, and you felt like, you know, something needed to do, and then you're saying, okay, maybe if he wasn't my friend, maybe I wouldn't do that, you know. I just wanted to make the point that it's really easy to be an ally of different groups in our community, meaning Jersey City, meaning Union City. Like, you know, the diversity is there. We all, you know, but what happens when you happen to be, or your friend happens to be the only person of that group at that given situation, you know? Sometimes it might take a little bit more for that. So, you know, again, I just wanted to share the quote and those ideas, and, you know, thank you all.
Thank you, Yuris. Did anyone else want to comment or have a question? Or
I had a question.
okay, we'll take a couple more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Keith. I just had a quick question for the panelists on how we can prevent microaggressions in the workplace or environments. I know we said education, but what are some other ways that those microaggressions are happening?
Kiara, I don't know if anyone from the panel wants to take this, but I have some comments at the end.
Go ahead, Yuris.
Okay, well, microaggressions, based on the information that we've looked at, through, you know, through eCornell and some of the sources that Elise and I have looked at, microaggressions, a lot of those things happen like when they are, you know, like you're not even thinking about it. Microaggression could be as simple as, you know what, I'm going to have a meeting with 4 of my coworkers in a little bit. And before I have the meeting with those 4 people, I'm going to meet with my friend beforehand and essentially hash out everything that needs to be discussed in the meeting. This is how we want everything to go. And you kind of go into that setting, you know, like, but that's already, that's already like an issue there. Another area would be, you know, like I'm talking in a meeting and I'm coming up with an idea. Maybe I'm not able to articulate what I'm trying to say that well. And then someone else kind of cuts me off and jumps in and kind of like builds on it, and then kind of says essentially the same thing that I was saying or that you were saying. And it's like, oh my God, that's incredible. That's a great idea. We should definitely do that. And then that talks to the climate. So one of the areas that I'm hoping to do that, and Kiara, to your point, education, it's important in the sense because a lot of those things might not be intentional, It's just what we're used to. It's just like, hey, I'm just gonna have a conversation with my friend. Oh yeah, that, and if I go to this meeting, we meet once a month, and the conversation is like, it's okay to cut this person off, and and it's okay to talk over that person and kind of take that and bring it to the next level. If that's the environment that we have that is conducive to that, then that will continue to happen, because those are the behaviors that are rewarded. That speaks to climate and to inclusion, right? So we're hoping to bring in more information of that sort, particularly education to managers, and when you're a manager, when you're a colleague, if you're mindful of those things, I hope that we could make some improvements in that area. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Iris.
I think also
one of the panelists, Eric, go ahead.
I think when you said preventing microaggressions, which I think would be wonderful, I don't know, just like the issue of discrimination and bigotry in general, if it's something that with simple actions can just suddenly be prevented. But I think many of the things we've discussed already, like speaking out when you see those things happening, right? That creating a workplace environment where people feel safe and okay saying, hey, when you say this thing to me, or you say this to other people and I hear you, or you do this thing, it's a microaggression. You are, maybe don't use the word microaggression, but you say it's offensive, it bothers me, it makes me uncomfortable. And I know that we don't always have that kind of safety and comfort. And I think in my experience, when I've seen them, a lot of times the discomfort comes from the person being sort of above you in the chain of command who might say it. And that adds a layer of fear, like, can I call out my boss who just said this thing? And even though, of course, legally, they shouldn't retaliate, you just don't know what the response would be. So I think for us, working towards an environment where that kind of response to a microaggression is accepted and encouraged would be at least a good step towards making microaggressions go away.
Thank you, Eric. Natalia, did you want to say something too?
I think everybody already said it. For myself, I see the workplace as a place where there's needed transparency. We have to have those transparent conversations and have the ability to speak openly about how we feel and be open to being ourselves, obviously in a professional way. And it starts with awareness. It starts with self-awareness. You can be educated, you can read all the books that you want, but the lack of self-awareness is going to still fall short. So it starts higher up, as Dr. Reber has already somewhat shifted our climate to have a greater climate of transparency. I think it's starting to trickle down. And it really starts in those higher positions where everyone starts to say, hey, I'm open to listening. It starts with showing up to these conversations. And I guess I want to say thank you to Chris and Daryl and Yuris and Lalisa and all the various individuals who are on this platform listening. And you guys have shown up time and time and time again and are supporting. So all of that is a form of allyship, but it's also a form of establishing the climate of transparency where we feel as though that bridge, we can come to you in those moments where we need to.
Okay. And that's what Natalia had just said. Can I add to what she just said very briefly? Is that the presence is so very important. It's not always that I or we have to open our mouths, but just by being in the room and showing up and standing up really speaks volumes. Sorry, Lalisa, go right ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you could see. No, that's fine. No, I was just wanting to go back for a quick second to the microaggression question about like what kinds of things can mitigate microaggressions in any setting. So one of the things that in the research they talk about through eCornell and through other sources is that, you know, microaggressions comes in like, you know, various layers. So there's like those little slight micro insults, and then there's those micro assault, and then there's full micro invalidation. And so it really does take some learning and training to understand like the differences of those. And the other thing about microaggressions, a lot of it it's subconscious, is at the subconscious level, and people don't really notice that it's happening because it's based on years and years of assumptions and stereotypes and attitudes that people hold and beliefs. And so where Anna and Dr. Jones and, you know, Dr. Reed and many others here are talking about, you know, you have to have those conversations, and, you know, Amala and all the others, you have to have those conversations about it. And then people have to then self-reflect, and they have to self-aggressively check themselves before you, because really when I did the research, because I actually spoke about this at a webinar, you have to almost like check yourself before you talk. So, because normally we speak in very regular kinds of rhythms, right? We're used to thinking that the thought comes up, we say this. So when you're trying to mitigate any microaggression behaviors, attitudes or actions, first you have to know what they are. That's number one, because, and then it's different for all kinds of groups, right? Whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's something dealing with ethnicity, whether it's dealing with gender, age, what have you. So it's a lot to it, but yeah. So I mean, I think we have some, like Iris and others have said, we have that training coming. And it's not like training is the silver bullet. It's not like it's the panacea, but it gives people the opportunity to know what it is. And then what they have to do in replace of a microaggression is things like micro affirmations. And a lot of people, they hear of affirmations as it relates to themselves. They want to affirm their career choices, affirm their whatever, but we can affirm our attitudes about other people. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Elisa. I have to say we will have to end today, but just for today, there are other programming coming up in 2 weeks. Mala and Natalia will be talking about colorism. So please continue our conversation with that. And there'll be other programming along the way. I know the President's Advisory Council. Advisory Council for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion will be collaborating with a lot of those programming. We started our storytelling series, and we hope to feature more of our very passionate HCCC family members. And so I do want to close today. I want to wholeheartedly thank our panelists and our collaborators for continuing to work on the things that matter to each one of them. This is important, and it's important every single day. So thank you all. We will be sending out a short assessment survey to everyone for your feedback. So we would be grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete the survey, and you'll have a moment to suggest if you want to collaborate with another program, or if you have other programming in mind that we can take up. So thank you all. Thank you to all of my partners and collaborators, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.